After a 60-game regular season and an expanded postseason format, which included two sub-500 teams, the World Series will consist of the two clubs with the best record in each league for the first time since 2013. Hello, everyone, and welcome into this Tuesday, October 20th edition of Around the Bases from 110 Sports, live streaming as always on the 110 Sports Network at 110sportsmedia.com/live and twitch.tv/110sports, as well as available on demand on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, and on the site. I'm Chris Brown. We've got a World Series matchup. The Dodgers playing in the Fall Classic for the third time in the last 4 years. They're still looking for their first title since 1988. The Rays, meanwhile, have reached the World Series for just the second time in franchise history, the first time in 12 years since 2008. A lot has changed since we last talked on Thursday's broadcast of Around the Bases. On Thursday afternoon, we had at that point a 3-1 series lead for the Rays over the Astros. Tampa Bay had won the first 3 games of that series, and then Houston had avoided a sweep with a Game 4 victory, but it looked like it was just a matter of another game or two before Tampa Bay would advance to the World Series. Meanwhile, you had the Braves out to a 2-1 lead over the Dodgers in the NLCS. After winning the first 2 games, then the Dodgers took Game 3, but it really looked like when we talked on Thursday, before Thursday's games, like we were trending in a situation where we could have both the ALCS and NLCS wrapping up by Game 5 or 6. And yet we ended up in a situation where we had 2 Game 7s, which is not a very common occurrence to have in both of the league championship series. So we have a lot to break down for you today here on the show. Here's a look at what you can expect on the broadcast today. We're going to start, of course, we're going to focus in on the World Series, obviously. That's the main topic for today, of course, with the World Series beginning this evening in Arlington, Texas. But here's how we're going to break things down. We're going to start with a little bit of a discussion about how these two teams got here, the Rays and the Dodgers, because, like I said, a lot's happened over the last 3 or 4 days. So, how did those series end up playing out? And what does it tell us about these two teams entering the World Series? So we'll start with that. We'll go through some news and notes of non-World Series related headlines in the baseball world from the last several days. Then we're going to get into what you need to know about the World Series specifically. So that's kind of open-ended, but here's a little bit of what you can expect. We're going to talk about some of the players who are hot, who are not hot at the plate, on the mound for the Rays and for the Dodgers, and what it means for these two teams. We're going to talk about some reasons for optimism for both of these clubs and also some causes for concern for both these clubs. Essentially, a case for and a case against both the Rays and the Dodgers winning the World Series. We're going to talk about one of the keys for both of these teams for their success this postseason. We'll talk about projected lineups. We'll discuss the rotations as it looks like they're going to shape out. A lot to break down, and then at the end of the show, I'll give you my prediction. We'll also talk about the World Series odds themselves. So let's start with how they got here, the Rays and the Dodgers. And we're going to start on the AL side. As you'll remember, Tampa Bay, best record in the American League this year, only AL team to reach 40 wins in the 60-game season. They swept the Blue Jays back in the Wild Card Series. Then they faced the Yankees in the ALDS, and that was an intense 5-game series. The Rays advancing to the ALCS, and then they jumped out to a 3-0 series lead over the Astros. And it looked like we could be potentially looking at a sweep, or, like I said, maybe it's 5 games, or maybe 6. But this idea that the series could go to 7 games seemed highly unlikely. The Rays just had all the momentum, of course, with the 3-0 series lead. Some of the factors that led to that lead for them, it wasn't that they were extremely hot at the plate. It was much more defense. The Rays were playing incredible defense the first several games of that series. The series overall, they played great defense, but particularly in a couple of those early games, in the series. They were winning games because of their great defense. They were making great plays, diving catches, incredible diving stops, throws. I mean, everything that was hit toward them, they were making the plays. They were positioning themselves well on defense. And the Astros were making defensive mistakes. Jose Altuve specifically, we talked about it. The Rays were getting good pitching, as they have been all season long. And with that great rotation, great bullpen, one of the best in baseball. And they were just getting timely hits. It wasn't that they were stringing together a lot of hits, and we're going to talk about that coming up. They were just getting timely hits. And the Astros weren't. The Astros were stranding a lot of runners. They were actually, the Astros, not hitting horribly. The Rays gave up some pretty hard contact to Houston in that series, in particular in the first couple of games, but the Astros didn't have much to show for it. They didn't come up clutch. They did not drive in runs with runners on. They were not batting well in those situations. So the Rays taking a 3-0 series lead behind pitching, defense, and those timely hits, capitalizing on the mistakes of Astros pitchers. And then it got interesting, of course, with the Astros coming back to tie this series. Zach Greinke, Framber Valdez both had very good outings for the Astros within those 3 games. And the Astros pitchers held the Rays batters to a 206 average in games 4 through 6, which isn't that much different than how they hit in the other games, but it's one of those situations where when you're a team that's hitting about 200 in the series, which is what the Rays did in the ALCS, you're putting yourself in a position where your formula could fall apart on you if your starter gives up an extra home run. There's not a lot of margin for error, and we saw some of the flaws, some of the vulnerability of the Rays system. And it's not a system that I'm criticizing. It certainly works for them, and it's not as if they can flip a switch and all of a sudden become have a different kind of style. It's a great style. It's a style that led them to the most wins in the AL this year. But it did show some of the vulnerabilities of the Rays' approach, because the bats just weren't going for them in those other games, not enough, and they weren't getting enough of those big hits in the big moments. The pitchers faltered just enough. It wasn't as if they were getting beat around, but the Astros won games 4 through 6 in the ALCS to force a game 7. And we had Brandy Arozarena and Mike Zunino, the two MVPs offensively for the Rays this postseason. Arozarena certainly, of course, in a class of his own. Zunino also having an incredible postseason. We'll talk about him. But the two of them hit home runs in Game 7, and then it was the Charlie Morton show. After that, generally speaking, the veteran pitcher threw 5 2/3 scoreless innings, setting the tone for a 4-2 Rays victory in Game 7 of the ALCS. We'll talk more about Morton coming up. As for the Astros, that was the team that everyone hated, everyone wanted to be eliminated from the postseason, and I understand that, of course, given their circumstances and the sign-stealing scandal and all of that. But I think it also is important to acknowledge the impressive fight that this team had. I mean, they weren't expected to go anywhere in the postseason. This was a team that was under 500. But certainly had talent. We all knew that they were a better than 500 caliber team. But there was underperformance from a lot of their star hitters. Verlander out, Jordan Alvarez out, a lot of veteran bullpen arms out. And they weren't expected to go anywhere. And they made this run into the ALCS, and then the Rays taking the first 3 games from them, they could have easily kind of thrown in the towel. But I do want to acknowledge, just from I get the criticism of the Astros, I really do, and I understand not wanting to see them in the World Series. But I think it's important to note that, it should be noted the fight that they showed. This is an experienced team from a postseason perspective, and they did fight back. I mean, very few teams who have found themselves in a 3-0 hole in a divisions in a league championship series, in a best of seven series, are coming back to tie that. It very rarely happens. So the Astros making it, showing some incredible fight in this postseason. But so credit to Dusty Baker, who it's an interesting storyline because of course as much as everyone wanted to see the Astros eliminated from the postseason, there's also this feeling, generally speaking, and again, I'm not speaking for everyone on any of these things, not reflecting everyone, but there's also this tone that Dusty Baker's very widely, highly respected manager who people did want to see have success. So there was a bit of a conflicting interest, I think, from a general baseball fan perspective. So some real credit to Dusty Baker, I should say, for pushing his team, fighting, helping for this team to fight to the point that they got to. I mean, they could have rolled over. They could have threw in the towel at several points. It was certainly a rocky season for them, from underperformance to those injuries, and so some credit to Dusty Baker for the job he did there, because it certainly wasn't easy circumstances. But it's the Rays advancing to the World Series, as I mentioned, for the first time since 2008, to face the Los Angeles Dodgers, the best team in baseball this season, sweeping, of course, as we talked about, the Brewers and then the Padres in the first two rounds of the postseason. And then they faced a greater challenge in the Atlanta Braves. Both these two teams, the Braves and the Dodgers, came into the NLCS undefeated in the postseason. Both clubs swept the wild card series and swept their division series matchups. And the Dodgers, of course, were the favorites going into the NLCS, but it was the Braves who won the first two games of this series and three of the first four to take a 3-1 series lead behind some strong pitching and their powerful lineup. We saw Max Fried and Ian Anderson continue their dominant postseason runs. It wasn't necessarily as dominant, their NLCS outings, as previous playoff appearances, but we saw them again continue their incredible runs. And the Dodgers dropping the first two games of the NLCS, that was certainly a surprise, but there was also this sense going into the middle games of the NLCS that we knew the Braves didn't have a ton of starting pitching depth options. It was Fried, and it was Ian Anderson, and then there was a lot of question marks. Only one time entering the NLCS, somebody not named Max Fried or Ian Anderson had started for the Braves. So we knew, even though the Braves had this 2-0 series lead, that the Dodgers, well, of course we knew what they're all capable of, but we also knew they were going to be facing some very less experienced, less proven starting pitchers from the Braves in games 3, 4, 5 of this series, potentially. So it certainly wasn't over till it's over, and the Dodgers remained confident in their star power and in their depth, and they won 3 straight elimination games thanks to home runs, thanks to key defensive plays, Mookie Betts in particular with some great catches in right field, and he had one in Game 5, one in Game 6, and one in Game 7 of this series. All of them very significant momentum-shifting kind of catches in right field. And also a Dodgers bullpen that there has been some concerns about, but posted a 2.00 ERA in Games 5 through 7. And so we, of course, after trailing 3-1, the Dodgers won 2 straight. They evened up the series, and then we had a Game 7 there as well. That game just 2 nights ago on Sunday evening. And they got home runs from Kike Hernandez and from the former NL MVP Cody Bellinger. And a crucial part of this 3 shutout innings in relief from Julio Urias, as Dave Roberts' club captured a 4-3 Game 7 victory. So they advanced to the World Series, as I said once more, for the 3rd time in the last 4 years. They've got all the pressure on them, and we'll talk more about that in a moment. As for the Braves, this is a team that had won 7 straight, as I mentioned, to begin the playoffs, but they squandered a 3-1 series lead. And in Game 7, and I don't want to, dive too much into the weeds of any particular game, but they had plenty of opportunities in Game 7. They had an early lead in Game 7. They were up 2-0 early, and of course that's not a safe lead against the Dodgers for any club. But they had a chance to really capitalize and run away with this game early, or at least make it be, make it be 5 or 6 runs in the early innings rather than just a couple. They had runners on, they hit into a double play, and then there was base running mistakes that are just simply unacceptable, where they were in a perfect opportunity to score several runs, or multiple runs at least, and they ran themselves into outs, things that you just can't do. There's no great analysis to it other than that. The Braves were in a position to win this game against the Dodgers. They had the early series lead. The Dodgers came fighting back. But even in Game 7, it's not as if the Dodgers came out with all, and just used their momentum and just, coasted to a 5-0 victory. The Braves had opportunities in Game 7, and they just let it slip away. So there's not much to say with them other than that. Other than that, this is a team that has been great in recent years, that is going to be great for years to come. This is a really fun Braves team. This year's team had a real mix of veterans and who may not be around for years and years to come, and also a lot of young up-and-coming stars who are going to be there for years to come. The Braves, this is a Braves team I really, really liked. I wanted to see them get a shot. I don't have a problem with the Dodgers being in the World Series at all. They're certainly deserving, just based on their talent and everything that they've done this year. But the Braves are a really exciting and fun team, and they're going to be a threat in the National League for years and years to come. They've had that mix, like I said, the Marcell Ozuna, the Nick Markakis, that they're not going to be around, both of them probably for years and years to come with the Braves, but you've got Ozzy Albies, you've got Ronald Acuna Jr., you've got some incredible offensive pieces, and Freddie Freeman, of course. And then you've learned this postseason about the 2 guys who could really be frontline starters in the National League for years to come, in Max Fried and Ian Anderson, who really, really broke out this postseason. Combine those 2 with Mike Soroka, who, of course, out for most of the season after tearing his Achilles. It's not, certain when he'll be back to full strength, if ever, but there's this idea that the Braves, pitching a real concern for them in this season. They had to kind of cobble stuff together, and it still, can be, but there's this possibility here that the Braves have 2 or 3 real frontline starters for years to come, and that's a really exciting thing for them. Combine it with that young core group of hitters as well. This is going to be a great team for years to come. But it is the Dodgers, and it is the Rays in the World Series, which begins tonight. This evening in Arlington, Texas. We're going to take our first break of the broadcast. When we come back, we'll go through some news and notes, as I mentioned, of some non-World Series related, non-playoff related items. We'll go through those pretty quickly, and then we'll jump into a real World Series preview with some different segments, if you will, of things you need to know. We'll go through the basics of the series, the schedule of the series, where you can watch the series, where you can listen to the series. We'll talk about the players that have carried their teams, the Rays and the Dodgers, to this point of the postseason, the case for, the case against each of these teams, a key that's been important for both of these teams this season. We'll talk about projected rotations, how that could factor in. A lot to discuss here when we come back after this quick break here on Around the Bases from 110 Sports. All right, welcome back to this Tuesday, October 20th World Series preview edition of Around the Bases from 110 Sports, live streaming here on the 110 Sports Network. I'm Chris Brown. Time to jump into some news and notes before we get you into what you need to know about this World Series matchup. So we'll go through these here. The Marlins announced Sunday that they have parted ways with their president of baseball operations, Michael Hill. Farm system director Dick Scott and minor league catching coordinator Jamie Quirk were also reportedly let go. Hill's contract was set to expire at the end of October, reportedly, and the team will now head in another direction despite making the playoffs for the first time since 2003. Hill joined the team's front office in 2002 and was promoted to president of baseball operations in 2013 after serving as general manager for 7 years. The Nationals have hired Jim Hickey as their new pitching coach. He will replace Paul Menhart, who was let go after his first full season on the job. Hickey most recently served as a pitching coach with the Cubs in 2018 and previously served as pitching coach for the Rays for roughly a decade. The Reds announced Monday that general manager Nick Krall will lead their baseball operations department. He will take over the duties of Dick Williams, who resigned earlier this month for personal reasons. Krall has been in the Reds organization for 19 seasons, including the past 3 as general manager. Longtime MLB coach Brian Price has announced his retirement from coaching on a full-time basis. The 58-year-old spent 1 season with the Phillies after previously managing with the Reds for 5 seasons and serving as pitching coach previously for the Mariners, Diamondbacks, and Reds. Final item for you here today, the MLB Players Association is introducing an annual Curt Flood Award. The honor will be given to a player who, quote, who in the image of Flood, quote, demonstrated a selfless, long-time devotion to the Players Association and advancement of players' rights. Flood was a 3-time All-Star and 2-time World Series champion with the Cardinals in the 1960s, and the announcement came on the 50th anniversary of Flood's legal challenge to the baseball's reserve clause, which back in the day, it bound a player to one single team until that team decided to either release or trade that player. Flood's effort to weaken that clause actually eventually got struck down in the Supreme Court, but it did pave the way for a later successful challenge, which eventually led to the beginning of free agency as we know it today in the 1970s. And those are your news and notes for today, so we're going to dive into what you need to know entering this Rays-Dodgers World Series. I have a story up right now today at 110sportsmedia.com breaking this down in written form, so feel free to check that out for some of this information because I tried to lay this out in different segments, different sections to try to break down, basically what do you need to know? What are the basics of the matchup? What are the key players you need to watch for? What's the reason for optimism and cause for concern for both these clubs? And eventually I give my prediction, which I'll also give today here at the end of today's broadcast. So we're going to start with the basics, just lay them out for you and make sure everyone knows them. It's the Tampa Bay Rays and the Los Angeles Dodgers. Game 1 is tonight, October 20th, just after 8 p.m. Eastern at Globe Life Field in Arlington, Texas, the Rangers' new stadium, where there will be a limited number of fans in the stands, as has been the case in the NLCS that was played at Globe Life Field as well. All the games will be airing of the World Series on Fox. They will all be beginning just after 8 p.m. Eastern. They'll also all be on ESPN Radio. One important note, just as far as the basics of the schedule of this series, there will be off days in the World Series. We have not had off days within the series, the Wild Card Series, the Division Series, the League Championship Series. Unlike in previous years, there were no off days this season, this postseason, in those series, in part to get the postseason done more quickly and with the expanded format, the fact that we're adding games into it. and also in part because there's no in-series travel like unlike in other seasons. So there are off days though introduced in the World Series. So we'll have game 1 tonight, game 2 Wednesday night, off day on Thursday, no travel of course, staying in the bubble setup in Texas. But it'll be Tuesday, Wednesday, and off day on Thursday, and then Friday, Saturday, Sunday for games 3, 4, and 5. And then there would be another off day on Monday before games on Tuesday and Wednesday of next week, games 6 and 7. Of course, that's as well as game 5. Those are, if necessary, games. I'd be very surprised to see a situation in which we have a sweep and we're done by Saturday. But there certainly is a situation in which the World Series could be over by the end of this week, and there would be no need for games on Tuesday and Wednesday of next week. But that is the schedule. 2 games, off day, 3 games, off day, 2 games. Those last 3 are if needed. So those are the real basics of the setup for the World Series. Next thing I want to discuss here is who's hot and who's not for these 2 teams. In other words, who has carried these teams to their postseason success. It's another way of looking at it. Who are the key players to watch? Who have been the key players carrying these teams? For the Rays, you have to start offensively with rookie outfielder Randy Arozarena. He has been the breakout star of this postseason. He's hitting .382 with 7 home runs, which are the most by a rookie in a single postseason ever. No rookie has ever hit 7 home runs in a single MLB postseason. And there are still going to be at least 4 more games at a bare minimum for Arozarena to add to his record. The 25-year-old has played in just 42 regular season games last year with the Cardinals, and then getting called up near the beginning of September with the Rays. He became the first rookie position player to win League Championship Series MVP. He hit .321 with 4 home runs and 6 RBI to carry the Rays offensively against the Astros. Mentioned this a little bit earlier as well. Catcher Mike Zunino has been making a major impact offensively for the Rays this postseason. He has 4 home runs, which is tied for second for a catcher in MLB history for a single postseason. A couple other hitters who have been hot for the Rays, outfielder Manuel Margot has 5 homers and a team-high 11 RBI in the postseason, and first baseman Ji-Man Choi has also been having a good postseason, a .952 OPS. On the pitching side, the guy you got to start with is Charlie Morton. We're talking about who's doing well for the Rays. He has a 3-0 record, a 0.57 ERA in 3 starts this postseason. Of course, I mentioned his Game 7 performance in the ALCS. That made him just the only pitcher in MLB history with 4 winner-take-all victories in the postseason. So he's been outstanding. Nobody else has more than 2 winner-take-all victories in postseason history. Morton has 4. Blake Snell, meanwhile, has also been doing well for the Rays, a 3.20 ERA in 4 starts. Right-hander Peter Fairbanks out of the bullpen. He became the 13th pitcher to record a save for the team this season, and he leads the Rays with 3 postseason saves. Reliever Diego Castillo has also been outstanding for Tampa Bay. He has 23 strikeouts in 21 2/3 innings. He's posted a 1.66 ERA during the playoffs. So those are your main guys who are, doing a lot of the heavy lifting for the Rays this postseason. On the Dodgers side, Corey Seager, the shortstop, has unquestionably been the team's best hitter this postseason. He has 6 home runs, 4 doubles, and 15 RBI. At one point in the NLCS against the Braves, he had RBI. He drove in a run in 5 consecutive plate appearances. He also set NLCS records with 5 home runs and 11 RBI, and he was named NLCS MVP. Corey Seager having a great year, and having a great postseason. Cody Bellinger, he became just the first player to twice hit a home run in an NLCS Game 7. And then you've got Mookie Betts as well, of course, one of the stars of the many stars on this Dodgers team. He's not been tearing it up at the plate right now, but he's made, as I mentioned, those remarkable catches in games 5, 6, and 7. So those are some of the hot hitters or hot hitters for the Dodgers right now. Some of the stars you need to kind of know if you haven't been paying attention. On the pitching side for the Dodgers, they've got Walker Buehler pitching like an ace once again. He held the Braves to just 1 run in 11 innings in 2 NLCS starts, including in Game 6. His postseason ERA is 1.89. Kenley Jansen, the longtime closer for the Dodgers, has been off and on again for them this season and this postseason, dealing with some velocity problems and control problems, but he appears to have potentially earned the Dodgers' trust back again as he threw 3 shutout innings against the Braves in the NLCS, and then Julio Urias, who I mentioned a little bit ago, he's been sensational both in a starting and relieving role for the team in October, posting a 0.56 ERA over 16 innings. As for who's not hot, who is struggling right now for both these teams, a couple players that are noteworthy to mention. Of course, we're not going to mention every player who's not having a great postseason, but for the Rays, we should mention second baseman Brandon Lau. He's been the team's best hitter this season, the second baseman, but he struggled this postseason. He hit 154 in the ALCS, and he has struggled all postseason. Shortstop Willy Adames, corner infielder Yandy Diaz, also struggling at the plate. And on the mound, Nick Anderson, who is one of the best relievers in baseball right now. He's given up 1 or 2 earned runs in each of his 3 ALCS appearances. It hasn't fared well, a 4.63 ERA for the postseason. Of course, plenty of reason to believe he'll turn that around. He's been one of the best relievers in baseball over the last few seasons, if not the best. For the Dodgers, veteran outfielder A.J. Pollock, who had a great regular season, he's been struggling in the postseason, but not too much you can really do, cause for concern there. Clayton Kershaw, that's a big name, of course. He's starting Game 1 for the Dodgers tonight. He held the Brewers scoreless, I should say, over 8 innings in the wild card series, but in his last 2 starts, his most recent 2 starts of the postseason, 7 earned runs in 11 innings. He also had his most recent start in the NLCS pushed back due to a back issue, due to back spasms. So he has been struggling. Of course, there's this long narrative about Kershaw's postseason struggles, so he's going to be a lot of pressure on him heading into tonight's game. We'll talk about that coming up. Also, rookie Tony Gonsolin, who has been great in a mostly starting role for the Dodgers this regular season. He hasn't fared well in the postseason, but we're talking about a pretty small sample size. So that's who's hot and who's not. I want to go over now for each of these teams, and we'll take it one team at a time. Reason for optimism, cause for concern. So essentially, you're looking at each of these teams. Why are you optimistic about this team's chances, and why would you be concerned? What are the flaws? What could go wrong for these teams? So let's start with the Rays. And the case for the Rays is, look, they have baseball's best and deepest bullpen. It's only made better by the fact that they've got an incredible trio of starters in Charlie Morton, Blake Snell, and Tyler Glasnow, and Ryan Yarbrough is a very serviceable 4th starter. And as for the bullpen, there's so many arms in that bullpen who Kevin Cash can rely on for high leverage situations, for low leverage situations, and a lot of different styles and approaches from these relievers that can keep any opponent off balance, from Diego Castillo and Peter Fairbanks and John Curtis, who are all very hard throwing. You've got guys with all the spin rate like Josh Fleming and Aaron Loop, and then there's guys like Anderson, who's been one of the best in baseball. He's got incredible pitch movement. And then you've got Ryan Thompson, who's got this sidearm delivery that throws batters off. So there's a lot of guys that Kevin Cash can turn to in high leverage situations that he trusts. So you combine that bullpen with that great trio of starters. You've got a team that's shown some incredible defensive play and defensive positioning from Kevin Kiermaier and Hunter Renfroe and Manuel Margot in the outfield and Joey Wendell and Willie Adames and G-Man Choi and all these guys showing Gold Glove caliber abilities this postseason, and particularly in the ALCS. And this is a team that I don't want to make too much of it because it's not something that can be quantified easily. But there just seems to be some really incredible defensive positioning for the Rays. We saw it in the ALCS where the Astros were hitting it hard in spots where there normally wouldn't be a fielder. But hey, the Rays had positioned perfectly to be ready for that. So it's incredible pitching, of course. That's a lot of what's carried them here. Great defensive play. Resilience, you can't really quantify that, but this is a really resilient Rays team. And there's certainly a formula for success for them to win this series. They're the underdogs against the Dodgers. You probably already knew that. But the Rays are used to that. They were the underdogs against the Yankees, even though they won the AL East. They're not afraid of being the underdog. That doesn't scare them. That's pretty clear. Now, the case against the Rays, the causes for concern, if you will. They haven't really been that great of an offensive team in the postseason. Which seems weird to say because, look, I mean, they're in the World Series. How do you get to the World Series without being a pretty good offensive team in the postseason? Well, they've hit just 209 this postseason. They hit just 201 in the ALCS. That's not good at all. But they've had the timely hits. They've had the timely hits. They've capitalized on mistakes. Several of those timely hits have been home runs, and it's proved to be just enough offensively with that great group of pitchers and that lockdown defense. They have not been stringing together a lot of hits. It's been a lot of walk or hit by pitch and then somebody homers. And then you do that, twice in a game and it's 4-0. I mean, it's 4 runs and then that's all you need because the Rays pitching limits their opponent to 3 runs. That's the kind of formula, the kind of way that a lot of these games have played out. That's the kind of approach that the Rays take. But it's fair to wonder if that formula is not going to work and to be concerned about the team's offense. Because, of course, the Dodgers have a great group of pitchers. And you're in the situation where they've gotten a lot of where they are in this postseason with Randy Arozarena and then a couple home runs from Zunino and other guys. But if you're not getting some of the other key Rays hitters, like the Brandon Lows, I should say, like the Adames, like the Diaz, to wake up at the plate and to give you something more, then you're asking a lot of Randy Arozarena and a lot of the Rays pitching staff against we know how talented the Dodgers offense is. So I think it's fair to wonder whether the Rays formula will hold up against the Dodgers because there's not a huge margin for error. They, of course, have the ability to string together hits, to have great offensive games, but what happens if those other hitters don't wake up at the plate and Arozarena takes a step back? Or even if he doesn't take a step back, if he's the only one hitting, it's just not going to be enough. It puts an immense amount of pressure on your pitching and your bullpen for any pitch, even though you're one of the best, against a great lineup if you cannot score more than a couple runs yourself. So that's the cause for concern for the Rays, for me, is that offense. And wondering if they're going to be able to score enough runs against a good Dodgers team and against a good Dodgers team pitching-wise and against a good Dodgers team offensively where even good games from Rays pitchers could result in a good number of Dodgers runs. Now, as for cause for concern for the Dodgers, it's a little bit less obvious, which is a big reason why they're the favorites in this series. But it should be pointed out that there is just the one off day for the Dodgers between Game 7 of the NLCS and Game 1 of the World Series tonight. So they're likely going to be without a couple of pitchers in Game 1 at least And they're also not going to be as well rested and easily aligned from a starting pitching perspective as the Rays are. Blake Trinan, the veteran reliever for them, pitched in some high leverage situations. Well, he pitched in 3 consecutive games to end the NLCS, so he's probably not pitching tonight. And there's some cause for concern about Dustin May and Tony Gonsolin after their struggles in Game 7 of the NLCS. And even though Jansen seems to be doing well again, there's still not complete confidence that the Dodgers have a set late inning plan. They have options, but it's not like you're really confident that they've figured it out 100%. It's perfect. Like Jansen goes out there and blows a save tonight, all of a sudden you're scratching your head again and wondering what do you do if you're the Dodgers in the back end of that bullpen. I'm not saying that's going to happen, but it's not a perfect situation there. So that's the causes for concern for the Dodgers. They're not, and we'll talk about the rotation setup, they're not able to line up their rotation perfectly. And there's this situation where you are relying on some young starters, whether in starting roles or in long relief roles or high leverage relief roles. Some inexperienced arms. You've got some guys who are a little bit taxed out of the bullpen. It's not a perfect pitching situation for the Dodgers. I could see that falling apart for them. So that is one area where that's a cause for concern for the Dodgers, potentially. I'm not saying, it's a huge problem, but that's the area where I could see it fall. If it were to fall apart, that's probably where I would see it falling apart for the Dodgers. Couple other things I want to go through about what you need to know heading into this series. One key for both of these teams this season has been the long ball. As I mentioned, the Rays have not been stringing together hits with regularity this postseason, but this is an incredible stat. 72%, 71.9% of the Rays' runs this postseason have come off of home runs. 72% of Rays runs have come via home runs. Among teams entering a World Series matchup, so in MLB history, teams that have made it into the World Series, that's easily the highest mark of runs coming from home runs. The highest mark previously was the 1971 Pirates, who entering the World Series had scored 58% of their runs via home runs. So that's a huge difference, 58% to 72%. That's a huge percentage. The Rays have really relied on the home run this postseason. And look, they can string together hits, but if they don't string together hits, they're going to really need the long ball. Otherwise, they're not going to be able to score enough offensively. Now, it should also be noted that the Dodgers have also been hitting home runs left and right. They hit 16 home runs in the NLCS, which is tied with the 2008 Rays, as a matter of fact, for the most home runs hit in a single postseason series in MLB history. So they're also hitting home runs left and right. Now, they have shown, though, the Dodgers have, the ability to string together hits and succeed without hitting a ton of home runs. I think that's pretty clear. I'm not saying they couldn't run into trouble offensively. I mean, they struggled against the Braves' top pitchers. They're not a perfect offense that's just gonna, go on this tear no matter what. And of course, the Rays have a lot of talented pitchers. So I'm not saying this Dodgers offense couldn't run into trouble. But they have shown the ability, unlike the Rays, really, in this postseason, they've shown the ability to string together hits. They can hit the home runs, but they don't necessarily have to have the home runs in the same way that the Rays have this postseason. So that's one thing to keep in mind too. And I think we could see a lot of games, potentially game 1, where we have, 4 or 5 home runs hit in a game. That would not surprise me. I'm not necessarily projecting it or predicting it, but just something to keep an eye on. We could see a lot of home runs hit in this World Series. A couple other things I should mention. Projected rotations, just go through this quickly. There's not a lot of analysis for it, but for the Rays, Tyler Glasnow goes in game 1 tonight. Blake Snell goes in game 2 tomorrow. Those were announced by the team. After that, projection would be that Charlie Morton will get the ball in Game 3, Ryan Yarborough in Game 4, and then if for Games 5, 6, and 7, it would be Glasnow, Snell, Morton. It's pretty safe bet that that's probably how they're going to go, barring something uh, strange happening. Of course, maybe they go for an opener in Game 4 instead of Yarborough. I mean, it's possible, but they've got a much simpler starting situation. And of course, if they get to a Game 7, it would be Morton on the mound again, and of course, we all know how he's done in Game 7s. For the Dodgers, it'll be Clayton Kershaw on the mound tonight against Tyler Glasnow in Game 1. The team has announced that Walker Buehler will start Game 3 of this series. And last I checked, we did not have an answer for who would be starting Game 2. This is a much more fluid situation with the Dodgers. As I mentioned, they've had to throw out some young guys and do openers essentially, and it's not as clear of a situation for the Dodgers. But it'll be Clayton Kershaw on the mound for Game 1 tonight. Walker Buehler, there was some thought, is he going to pitch on Game 2 on short rest? And no, he's going to pitch in Game 3 instead. So it's unclear who's going to start Game 2. Maybe they turn to Julio Urias. Maybe they turn back to Dustin May or Tony Gonsolin for a couple innings to start the game. But that is something to keep an eye on because, right, again, the nightmare situation, I guess, if you're the Dodgers, is from a pitching perspective, is Kershaw gets rocked in Game 1. Maybe he's still dealing with the injury no matter what, the circumstances are. Then they have to throw somebody out there for Game 2 who struggles. Maybe it's Urias. Maybe it's if they have to turn to May or Gonsolin for a couple innings and that they just don't have it. All of a sudden you're having problems right away with the pitching. So it is something to watch there. Their situation not as clear. So Kershaw Game 1, unknown Game 2, Walker Buehler Game 3, and then Game 4. I mean, from that point on, you'd think Kershaw's going to get a second start. Buehler would get a second start later in the series, like a Game 7. But other than that, it's unclear whether they, do they go to May a couple of times or Gonsolin or piggyback those guys, bring in Julio Urias to start, or do they want to keep him in a high leverage relief role? Then all of a sudden, maybe you need both May and Gonsolin. It's not a perfect situation for them. It's not as clear cut. And if they run into trouble with their starters earlier in this series, it could cause problems down the line. So that's just one thing I want to note for the Dodgers. Of course, a lot of pitching talent, but it's not as clear of a situation as with the Rays. Finally, as for your projected lineups, and we're not going to get to each of these players or anything like that, but I would expect to see, generally speaking, both of these teams are going to mix and match a lot. They're just going to mix and match a lot. We're going to see that. But just a sort of a reminder for how these teams are going to line up. For the Rays, I'd expect to see Arozarena in left field most of the time. Kiermaier, who dealt with a wrist injury, he should be in center, though. He seems to be good to go. Manuel Margot, we'll see him in right a lot. Hunter Renfroe will also factor into the outfield mix. On the infield, I'd expect to see Joey Wendell at third, Willy Adames at short, Brandon Lau at second, and Ji-Man Choi at first as sort of the default starting lineup. But I would not be surprised to see Yandy Diaz, who I'm imagining also gets a good amount of time at the DH. I would not be surprised to see Diaz factoring in at first base as well. We could also see Mike Brosseau at third base or maybe at second base if Brandon Lau is still struggling. But that's their main guys. Mike Zunino will be behind the plate for most of these games for the Rays. Dodgers side, that they can mix and match as well, but I would expect to see A.J. Pollock in left, Cody Bellinger in center, Mookie Betts in right as your default out there in the outfield, Justin Turner at third, Corey Seager at short, and then they've got Chris Taylor, but also Kike Hernandez capable of handling second, and Max Muncy at first. We'll have Will Smith behind the plate most of the time, I would imagine. Maybe not in Game 1 because Kershaw doesn't necessarily always pitch to him. They've got Jock Peterson who can factor in the outfield in the DH role, and maybe we see some Edwin Rios in the DH role or at third base as well. So we're gonna go ahead and take our break. Take our final break of the show. That's your rundown of what you need to know. Some of the basics. It's not everything. We could talk for hours, but I think that's a good setup of what you need to know basically as far as who's been key for these teams this postseason, and what are the paths for them to succeed and for each of these teams to potentially succeed or struggle in the World Series. But when we come back, we'll go through the odds and I'll give you my prediction. You probably already know what it is, but I'll give you my rationale for why I'm picking the team I'm picking to win the World Series and how I think this could shake out. So that's coming up next as we round out this Tuesday edition of Around the Bases here on the 110 Sports Network. All right, welcome back one final time to this Tuesday, October 20th edition of Around the Bases from 110 Sports. Here's how we're going to wrap up the show today. As I mentioned, we're going to talk about the odds. So I'll just give you the odds, what it looks like, what people are expecting to happen in this World Series. And then I'll give you my prediction for a winner and how long the series will go and an explanation for it. So ESPN's projections give the Dodgers a 69.8% chance of winning the World Series. Maybe that's changed from that, but those were as of yesterday. If it's changed at all, I don't know if it's something that changes based on small developments or anything. But as of yesterday, ESPN's projections giving the Dodgers basically a 7 in 10 chance of winning the World Series. Fangraph's formula is very similar. It has the Dodgers favored 68% to 32%. So essentially, it's somewhere between, it's 2/3 chance for the Dodgers, 1/3 chance for the Rays, or maybe it's 70%, 30%. Either way, it's pretty much a clear Dodgers favorite in the World Series. There's no question about that. And my prediction for the World Series is Dodgers in 6 games. And that shouldn't be a surprise to anyone. That's probably the expectation of a lot of people, something like that. But here's my explanation for why. The Rays have stuck to a consistent formula this entire season. And it's a really great formula. It's working with what they have, which is great development of players and great development of pitchers in particular. They've got an incredible bullpen. They've got a great group of starters to top that rotation. But it is a formula that simply does not include as many different pathways to victory as the Dodgers system does. Even good pitching performances from the Rays pitching staff in this series, in the World Series, could result in 4+ runs being scored by the Dodgers in a game. Like, even a good performance from the Rays pitching staff could result in several Dodgers runs. And the Rays scored more than 4 runs just once in the ALCS. Without the Rays offense picking things back up and getting production from more than just home runs and more than just Randy Arozarena and a couple other guys, without the Rays offense picking it up, the club's pitching is just going to have to be incredibly dominant against one of the most deep and talented lineups, the most deep and talented lineup in baseball. There is a path for the Rays to win this series, no doubt about it. But I just don't think it's a likely enough path. The Dodgers have the depth, they have the talent, they have more avenues to success. This is a really fun Rays team, and I wouldn't have any problem at all if they win the World Series. It would be incredible. if they do. But I just can't pick against the Dodgers here, given what we know about these two teams and their approach this season, and particularly this postseason. So that's my pick. Dodgers in 6. We'll have a lot to discuss on Thursday's show. Again, a reminder as we head out today, Game 1 of the World Series is tonight, just after 8 Eastern is first pitch. It's airing on Fox and on ESPN Radio. Same time again, a little after 8 o'clock tomorrow for Game 2. Game 1 tonight, it'll be Clayton Kershaw opposite Tyler Glasnow. Game 2, at last check, it'll be Blake Snell for the Rays, and unclear who's going for the Dodgers. So we'll keep an eye on that. First couple of games of this series, the World Series, tonight and tomorrow night, and then we'll be back with you here on Around the Bases on Thursday to break down what the big observations are, what we learned from the first 2 games of the World Series. There'll be an off day on Thursday, little break to reset, and then back at it again on Friday, and we'll of course talk about that coming up on Thursday's show. Make sure to tune in to our other 110 Sports Live programming. Josh Mullenix is back with the J. Mole Show tomorrow at 11 a.m. Eastern. I'm sure he'll be breaking down Game 1 of the World Series and other major developments from the sports world and other storylines. Josh Doring will be back with Touchline Talk on Thursday at 11 a.m. Eastern. Then, of course, back with you again here on ATB Live at 1 p.m. So enjoy Game 1 and Game 2 of the World Series. Thanks so much for watching this edition of Around the Bases. Go to 110sportsmedia.com for the very latest, and I will talk to you again on Thursday.